On February 14, 2025, an explosion ripped a hole in Chernobyl's tomb. The new Safe Confinement, or NSC, the steel structure now covering the destroyed Unit 4 reactor, was struck by what an embattled Ukraine alleges to be a Russian-made Shahed drone. The detonation created a large opening and smoldering fire that spread in between the inner and outer layers of the 100-meter-tall edifice. Though both the hole and the fire were contained by on-site firefighting efforts, it only affected a small percentage of what is the world's largest movable land-based object. The long-term impact to this relatively fragile megastructure was far worse than anyone realized. The goal of this video is to explain how a single strike has compromised Chernobyl for years to come, and what happens now. It was made in partnership with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, the organization who has been the primary administrator of billions in international funds dedicated to making the site safe since 1995. Our aim here is to bring you never-before-seen footage of the Chernobyl power plant and 2025 drone strike, to detail the just-released report of the new future of the new Safe Confinement, and to ask for your help. Chernobyl's entanglement with Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine started early. On February 24, 2022, the site near the country's border with Belarus was stormed by tanks and trucks. Soldiers took over the power plant and took around 300 personnel hostage. Over the next 4 weeks, the plant workers were forced to continue their duties at gunpoint, with little to no food and almost no rest. The Russians trashed their offices, damaged plant buildings, and dug trenches in grossly contaminated ground. It remains unclear if the soldiers knew that cesium-137 sat alongside their AK-47s. The trench digging and tank movement ended up kicking up decades-old reactor fuel and fission products and briefly increased the ambient levels of radiation on site. The increase was negligible from a health physics perspective, but it indicated that the Russians either didn't know or didn't care about how their presence could change the safety of the site. Reports of young soldiers suffering radiation sickness, however, were never officially substantiated. Thankfully, after 600 hours of occupation, the Russians left the power plant on March 31st, ceding it back to Ukraine. The released workers did not cower or capitulate. They continued their important security and maintenance work, even making themselves patches to commemorate their fortitude. For a while, things went back to normal, at least as normal as they can be during an invasion. That all changed in the February of 2025, when one drone created the single most significant threat to the long-term safety of Chernobyl in 40 years. To understand how a single targeted strike could cripple the new Safe Confinement, you need to know how it was constructed and what for. You'd be forgiven for looking at footage like this and thinking that, while it's certainly not a good thing, there's no way a relatively small hole really disabled a dome that could fit the Statue of Liberty and the Roman Colosseum inside it at the same time, right? But the NSC isn't your typical building. In fact, it has more in common with the International Space Station than it does a skyscraper. The first steel sections of the megastructure that would be the new Safe Confinement went up in 2012. It was started off-site to minimize radiation exposure. Thanks to international donors and EBRD funding of over 2 billion euros, it finally slid into place over the Reactor 4 sarcophagus just 4 years later in 2016, pushed by hydraulic pistons and guided by lasers over the course of 15 days. Everything about the NSC is technically impressive. It is the world's largest movable land-based structure, tall and wide enough to fit the Sydney Opera House and host ancient gladiators. It weighs more than an offshore gas platform, is secured by enough screws for an airplane fuselage, and can brace safely against the winds of a level 3 tornado. The NSC is supposed to loom large over the forests of the Chernobyl exclusion zone for the next 100 years. Arguably, the two most important parts of the NSC are the main crane system that lines the spine of the structure and the 2-layer shell. The crane is what will actually decommission the failed reactor inside. It will dismantle the famous and fragile sarcophagus piece by piece until all of the rubble and debris has been sorted, secured, and stored away. But that's going to take decades. The NSC's shell is what ultimately keeps any potential radioactive releases from reaching the environment during decommissioning. It does so with pressure. The outside world is at atmospheric pressure. If the inside of the NSC was at the same pressure, any circulating radioactive dust and/or debris could naturally make it outside. To stop this, the main volume of the arch, all 4 million cubic meters of it, is at a slight negative pressure compared to the outside world. The so-called annular space between the arch's 2 layers adds to this effect by being slightly positively pressured. If the inner skin was breached, thanks to simple physics, clean air from the annular space would move in and contamination couldn't move out. If any drone or missile or anything else pierced both of the NSC's layers, the same would happen. It took terrorism, but the design passed the test. The International Space Station operates in one of the harshest environments imaginable, and so, like the NSC, it has to create and carefully maintain an interior environment that, if put in jeopardy by a puncture, needs to be immediately addressed. Thankfully, the multi-layer hulls of the ISS have never been fully compromised. The station has been struck over 1,000 times without real issue. But then again, it's never been struck by something 1,000 times larger than orbital debris and loaded with explosives. Also like the ISS, it's a relatively fragile, highly technical, pressurized megastructure that is meant to protect what's inside. Even a pin-sized hole in the ISS is a problem that requires a swift fix. Now, with the International Space Station in mind, watch this footage of the 2025 drone strike and never-before-seen shots from the inside of the NSC immediately after. Imagine something like this happening in space. It would be bad enough if the Shahed just made a hole and compromised the pressurized annular space, but it didn't just make a hole. It started a fire that spread underneath the dome's protective skin. It pierced components with shrapnel. It bent important structural elements. This wasn't like shooting a bullet at a bunker. This was like ramming a satellite into a space station. The hole was bad, but the fire was worse. The exploding drone had ignited the shell's insulating materials, and firefighters had to cut open dozens of additional hull-compromising holes in the structure just to check where the fire was. Drone footage would later reveal that there was fire damage across one entire side of the structure. As you can see for the very first time, to get the fire under control, firefighters had to do almost more damage to the outside of the NSC than the drone did. The spreading fire was stopped after 17 days. It was no small effort. Like astronauts on a spacewalk, plant workers covered in tools and safety equipment had to put themselves on the edge of a 100-meter-tall void while completing technical work. The crisis was over, the hole was patched. But because much of the damage was invisible and the threat of any radiological release eliminated, the international media stopped paying attention. They shouldn't have. Before the drone strike, it's likely that we could have witnessed the final cleanup of Chernobyl in our lifetimes. Now, it's unlikely that we'll see it this century. The 2 companies that previously formed the consortium that built the NSC have now completed the first technical assessment of the damage from the 2025 strike. It is not good. Chernobyl now needs at least 6 different kinds of repairs. First of all, and most obviously, the components that were compromised and or destroyed by the explosive force of the drone have to be repaired and weatherproofed. Next, the external surface of the new safe confinement has to be restored to the point of air tightness. Though no contamination escaped the structure after the strike, proper pressurization is needed to make sure that it never does. Recall the dozens of holes that had to be cut just to check the extent of the fire. All of those holes have to be repaired, sealed, and tested by technicians on ropes 30 stories above the ground. Only then can the space in between the 2 skins of the NSC be properly ventilated. Only then will the legitimately enormous volume the structure contains be secure. The most concerning find of this first report, however, is that the drone strike also compromised the enormous main crane system. This is the machine that will clean up Chernobyl. It's supposed to be what allows the power plant to slowly but surely take the sarcophagus apart under the safety of the NSC so that the reactor building itself, the fuel inside, and yes, even the elephant's foot lurking in the basement below, can be finally disposed of as nuclear waste. It is not an exaggeration to say that every moment this crane is compromised pushes the final decommissioning of the power plant further and further into the future. And so, before the thousands of people who work at CHNPP can resume their important work, the main crane has to be repaired, which, like everything else, is no small feat, especially in the most radiologically contaminated place on the planet. The report concludes that the new safe confinement may not return to functionality for the remainder of this decade, and that if repairs and construction and funding go as planned, which they likely won't thanks to Russian aggression in the region, restoration will cost at least €500 million. That is money that Ukraine literally cannot afford to spend right now. To be clear, Chernobyl is not the radiological risk that most people think it is. It is not releasing contamination into the environment. The thousands of plant workers there are not getting radiation sickness. The puppies on site are surprisingly healthy. Trust me. So, why is Chernobyl important today? Well, there's a lot to be learned. Dismantling a destroyed reactor like this is unprecedented. Doing so will therefore teach us a lot about remote technologies that can operate in high radiation environments and environmental remediation techniques. The site is also a symbol of unprecedented international collaboration across decades, one that gave Ukraine the confidence to look towards the future instead of towards the past. The drone strike has shattered that confidence. Supporting the efforts at Chernobyl, especially now, is the same reason why I continue to support the Clean Future Fund's Dogs of Chernobyl program. It's a unique opportunity to learn things we simply can't anywhere else in the world. All of this is why the EBRD and I are now asking for your help. We want to once again signal to the international community that Chernobyl and Ukraine are worth supporting. And all you have to do is interact with this video in any way. If you found it educational, interesting, or at least worth your time, leave a comment, like it, share it with somebody. Yes, the EBRD's work in Chernobyl is supported by the European Union, France, Norway, the United Kingdom, Canada, Germany, the Taiwan Business EBRD Technical Cooperation Fund, Belgium, and Italy, but we want this to be something those donors see as important to you. If you want to learn more about the EBRD's tremendous efforts in Ukraine, you can head to their website here for even more unique footage from inside the exclusion zone. Leaves fall silently in Pripyat. Whispers are loud. The town is now a forest. Old propaganda cracks and yellows in the sunlight. There's something special here. A past worth learning from. People worth helping. Until next time.